There we go. And also thanks everyone for joining on election night. I just put my phone on airplane mode. Oops, so I won't worry about results and everything. We can worry about that after. But as you can see on the slide, we have kind of a full and interesting evening together. We're gonna be our, core smaller group from 7 until 7:30. Kind of go over reviewing some things that we've learned, some things that we're still wrestling with, some of these key concepts. We're going to definitely have time for the Boulder activity, which we didn't get to last week, and you'll learn more about that. And then at 7:30, hopefully you all invited. Yes, we are election conscious. We have a lot of stuff to be tracking, at least Minneapolis and, I'm sure other cities, but for sure Minneapolis. But yeah, we have some guests that you've invited, and guest speaker Laura Height, who's going to talk about the biomass campaign at the legislature, which is a real life, as you all know, campaign happening this moment. And most of that time will be spent with her and hearing about some next steps that, maybe you and your community will be inspired to take. And then at 8:30, for our last 30 minutes, our guests and Laura will leave. We'll have a little break. I should say we'll also have a break at 7:30 to give time for our guests to come in. So we'll play some music again, and they'll pop in. And I should say that's also when we'll do our introductions of each other, our grounding, land acknowledgement, all that. And then we'll close near 9 with an introduction from Fred Small to the Faith in Action campaign, some next steps there, and then just really an evaluation, not only of our 4 weeks together, but an evaluation of yourself. Like, what are you feeling motivated to do next, and to continue this really important journey that we're on. So as I did the past 2 weeks, I'm just going to put these notes in the chat. I think you should probably already have them if you've been here. In fact, I'm going to stop sharing really quick. Has anyone not been here before? Is this anyone's first session? Okay, perfect. If it was, that's totally fine. Also, Lauren, if you could mute yourself. So you all should know this, but if you want to take notes, here is a central notes document that could be helpful for you, or maybe you want to take notes on a piece of paper, or you just want to be present, and that's great too. So really quick group norms. We'll go over this as well when we have our guests arrive, but extend grace, cut each other slack, use I statements. We're going to have some time for small groups when we do our Boulder activity. So again, try to speak from your experience. This is just good practice in general. Call people in rather than calling them out. I love give time for everyone to have an opportunity to share, especially if you're in a smaller group or sharing ideas. And again, be fully present as much as possible. If you just hopped on, I just said I put my phone on airplane mode, so I won't be worrying about the election. It will be there after. So I'm going to be present. So we're just going to do just a little bit of grounding from where we've been, and then I will stop talking in a second. But I just wanted someone, if you're willing to come off mute, to read this quote from Marshall Gans about leadership.
I'll read it out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose under conditions of uncertainty.
Thank you. And I don't know about you, and you might have to kind of read it again, but I really appreciate that quote because we are in really uncertain times, and I'm feeling that in my body, whether it's Glasgow or what's happening in Congress. There's just a lot of uncertainty right now, both in climate and elections, I suppose. And yet we're here to try to gain these leadership skills, to try to enable others to achieve our shared purpose, even under conditions of uncertainty where we don't know what's going to happen. So I'm going to present Give me a thumbs up if you can still see the screen. You should be able to. Okay. I wanted to do that so that we can look at our lovely staircase. This is what really has guided our time together, kind of gaining these concepts of taking ourselves from we have resources, we have assets, we have skills, we have money, we have all these different things, we have relationships, and maybe we have, some goals that we want to achieve, but how can we actually get to achieving them together, right? And so that's what this journey is all about. So let me just say, a couple weeks ago, we focused on having a shared story. So story of self, us now, which helped us go into shared relationships so we can connect with other people through one-to-ones, through hearing their own story. And then, of course, the spectrum of allies is another way of thinking about using our story, using our relationships to bring people along who might be ready and interested. We also talked about assets, naming what we have, whether that's our faith community or that's our book club or our family, really taking advantage of the assets that we have to make change. And then as you can see on the top, this brings us to the last three parts of our stairs. So shared structure, strategy, and action. And this little graphic at the top, I know it's small, was what we touched on about how to make goals for yourself. You could have a vision of the future. Maybe it's a vision where everyone, has clean air to breathe because there's no biomass incinerator in their neighborhood. And so you have that vision, but how do you actually make a clear goal to get there? How do you make your goal SMART? So specific, measurable, activating, all those things, time-bound, realistic. And then how do you have the strategy to achieve that SMART goal? And then as you can see in the bottom, we last week heard from Jessie, who shared a really inspiring story from Springfield fighting the biomass incinerator. And then I added this in because I forgot it last week. At the very beginning, we learned about the three-legged stool, and just as a way of framing climate action in a really balanced way, with these three legs being essential. So that brings us all the way up. And of course, you might have some of these concepts might still kind of be like, what is that? Or I'm not totally sure. So I'm going to leave this big full slide up just for a moment. I'd love for you just to look it over one more time. And if you're willing, either put in the chat or you can come off mute and share out loud one that you're still not totally sure about. Like you're not totally sure about something about, the spectrum of allies or, how to make a SMART goal or things like that. Or I suppose you could write in the chat or come off mute one that, has been really resonating with you. Okay, I see the three-legged stool. And we'll see if a couple others pop in. Does any brave soul want to come off mute? Oh, okay, Matthew, this is very helpful. Keep them coming. Not totally sure on how to settle on a shared strategy.
Can you just read the three parts of the three-legged stool? It's too small for me to see.
Yes, I know this is super small. Sorry. So practical. Yes. So Jean, I can just kind of explain quickly. So this is a way of thinking about climate action, whether it's in your house or in your faith community or wherever. So practical is one leg of the stool. That's literally reducing your emissions. It could be putting solar on your roof or composting, to reduce waste, practical solutions. Does anyone want to come off mute and say what systemic is? We're a safe space. Okay, that's fine. I'll say it. But Maybe someone else will say spiritual and relational. Systemic is using our faith voice and spiritual voice to actually change the system. So that could be calling your representative, that could be filling out a petition or having a meeting with, the governor or your city council person or whoever, to try to get them to maybe change a law. So not just making the practical personal change, which is important, but even if we all represent different faith communities and they all went carbon neutral in the next 5 years, which would be amazing, that's not going to make a dent, unfortunately, in global emissions. And so that's why we need to also be working to change the system itself, to create laws or make incentives and things to change society. And then the last one, I know it only says relational on it. It's a typo. It's supposed to be spiritual relational. Anyone want to say what they think that is?
I can speak to that. My name is Jenny. I think that in order to work with these important issues, we need to we really need to have our hopes up, and being in relationship with one another, doing this important work, and also getting strength from our spiritual sources, whatever they may be, is just I think a way that we may be able to sustain the work in the long run. And also it is part of the uprooting the system in a way that the changes, we need to do them together and making the changes. Thank you.
That's so beautiful. Yes, ditto. So being really intentional about, how to connect climate justice with your spiritual tradition, whether that's, whether you're, a Christian and your pastor, you encourage them to maybe include climate change in prayers or sermons, things like that, or, having lots of one-to-ones with people in your community to really talk about, like, how are you feeling about climate change? What do you care about? What's at stake for you? So really highlighting, how our faith and spiritual practices can sustain us, and also what they have to say about the crisis we're in. So thank you. Yes, Sue, thank you. That's so true. It will make a dent if we continue, if we don't just stop at the practical change, in our community. If we say, like, we did it, we're net zero in this one building, but that's it. Unfortunately, it's just so small. But if we use that to talk to other people, to inspire them to take action, to tell our story, to maybe talk to our legislator about, I'll just give a quick example, but then we can move on. But yeah, thanks so much, Sue. Just one example. We had our congressional meetings earlier this spring. I think I told you about that maybe last week. And it was really cool because we had some congregations that had gotten solar on their roof, and they worked together. So, spiritual and relational, they brought people from the faith community together on Zoom and figured out a way to tell their story quickly to their congressperson on Zoom, to say, hey, this is why we got solar. This is how much money we've saved. This is how we were able to do it. And we want you to, pass legislation at the federal level so that other faith communities can do this too, that don't have, maybe as many resources as we do, because we've saved so much money and all these different things. So absolutely, super critical. They're all equally, you can't have a stool without all three legs.
Can I just say one more thing? First thing is, I encourage folks who are making an action plan in their team to always include all three legs of the stool. So sometimes I'll be in a congregation and they'll be like, we've decided we're going to tackle the practical leg this year, right? Which may be the majority of what they're going to do is to get a solar system on their roof. But if they're going to do a solar system, they need to be thinking about having a worship service that blesses the solar panels. And they need to think about bringing in bringing that story of the solar panel to their representative. So if every action embeds pieces of each of the three legs of the stool, it will be more successful. It will also create a shared, like a team that is maybe has something for everybody. Because if you were to do something where only the building engineers really were involved, you might end up having a team sort of slip away from you. But if one part of the team is involved in getting the youth to do something around the solar panel and another part of the team is involved in the worship part of it, then there's something for everybody. I wanted to say one more thing about the three-legged stool, and that is, where does civil disobedience fit on the legs of the stool? Fred, what do you think? You have just been involved in that.
Well, it certainly is both collective and spiritual. For me, when I have been arrested, it's both an act of engagement in the powers and principalities, the systems of oppression, the political challenges that we face. But it's also a deepening in myself of, I don't want to sound grandiose, but a sort of consecration of my body in service to a larger cause.
That is so beautiful. And I think that oftentimes, we look for sort of a transactional thing. If I get arrested, I will do X, right? But anybody who's ever been involved in a mass movement knows that sometimes you can't do X and expect Y. You have to do X with the, conviction that this is almost a spiritual practice that you're doing. I also like to tell people who are, getting their homes in line or taking the bus or riding their bikes or doing practical things, it may not be that action alone is going to solve the problem, but it is a spiritual practice. It's a practical action in service of a spiritual practice, right? If we get one with ourselves and with the system, or with our resistance to the system, we can. So anyway, this is just playing with the three-legged stool idea in a broader conversation. I hope that you'll take this tool back to your communities and talk about how it resonates with people in your place.
And just noticing what Alex said too, that it could also be systemic because the point is to influence decision makers.
Yes, absolutely systemic. That was the first answer is systemic to civil disobedience, but it quickly becomes spiritual as well. So.
Well, I'm already aware that, look at that, we're already at 6:20. So our guests are going to be coming soon. And so question for maybe all of you. I saw also that Matthew wanted to maybe talk, like, not really sure about the best way to settle on a shared strategy, maybe if you're in a team. So I guess, Julia, this is a question for you and maybe the group too. We could take a vote, I suppose. We could either talk about that question or we could move into the Boulder activity and do that until.
I think that the Boulder activity will be the perfect answer to that question.
True. Okay, Julia, take it away.
Okay. How the heck do we get from this great team with this huge, seemingly unsolvable problem ahead of us, in order to figure out how to crack it, right? People are coming from all kinds of different directions trying to do that. We're going to do this short little breakout, and then I'm going to sort of talk for a moment about this really important question that you've asked, Matthew. So I'm right here. There is a large boulder. It is in the midst of a play yard that is next to a house of worship. And in this play yard, they're going to be putting in a new sort of creative green playground. They're going to have like playground structures and stuff like that. They've got a whole volunteer crew coming in to do this. But in order to do this, they need to move this 2,000-pound, 1-ton rock. And so I am going to very quickly break you into groups, and you will have exactly 3 minutes exactly 2 minutes or maybe 2 or 2.5 minutes to figure out what is your strategy, what is your committee going to do to get this rock out of the playground. And do you have any other questions about this like rock? You can also beam those in. So here's the breakout rooms, and there's going to be 3 or 4 of you per room, and we are gonna y'all are gonna come back with a solution to how you're gonna move this boulder. Jean, are you able to move into a room?
Not right yet. Sorry.
That's just fine. You don't need to. Hello, Bev. Have you been with us? I'm assigning you to a room, Bev.
Oh, okay.
It's room
Thank you.
1. You guys have a little project.
Okay.
So just go ahead and join that room. All right. Hello, everybody. I know you probably didn't have enough time to have a super solid answer, but I am going
Up
to.
with 2 or 3. We came up with 3.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna just call on group number 1. I don't know if you know who's in which group. I think Carissa, you were in that room, but who is also in that room who can tell me what your solution was? Yes.
So one of our solutions was not to move it and build around it because it was lovely rock, right?
Beautiful.
Or put it on rollers and roll it like the Egyptians did.
Perfect.
Or
Okay, what about another solution? Anybody have something different than that? What about group number 2?
We like it the way it is. Right in the middle of a creative space.
Okay, well, that wasn't the assignment though. The assignment
Oh, it was that we're thinking outside the box. We're responding to.
All right, what about
Well, group 2 also said we could hire a landscaping company and have them find a better home for it.
great.
Somebody
so
who wanted a rock.
You're going to need to have some skills at fundraising. You're going to have to look up on the internet and find that landscaping firm, etc. Beautiful. Anybody
Group
have
one,
one group that's going to get some rollers, another group that's going to hire a landscaping firm. What else?
We also thought about blowing it up.
Blowing it up. Oh my God, let's get the dynamite out. Maybe you could have a fundraiser while you blow it up. The point of this exercise before we invite our other guests in is that and this is an answer to the question, Matthew, which is that, when you have a goal that's clear, you need to move the rock, right? And it's a great question. Should it be moved? Does it have spiritual significance? All of those things need to be answered when you think about your goal, right? first you've got to analyze the goal, but once you know what the goal is, your next job is to figure out the strategy to reach the goal. So it's very important to separate the goal conversation, should we move this rock, from the conversation about how should we move this rock. So if the strategy is about how to move the rock, you could have a fundraiser and hire a firm. You could get out the dynamite. You could get out the rollers. You could send people to the gym and lift weights and send everybody. But those are, each of them are going to have very different sorts of strategies that are going to be, or very different tactics that you're going to need to do, different skills, different things on the timeline of what you're going to do. If you don't have a good strategy conversation, you will be in big trouble. And I would ask you to think about how you've seen in your life a group of people who have a really good goal, but not a clear strategy, and how they work cross purposes all the time. So if you have one group hiring the dynamite firm and another group hiring the rollers, really it's kind of a problem. And so we need to figure out how to make that not happen. All right, we are going to take a break, and we will come back and we'll talk more about the sort of strategy to goals conversation after our break.
And I'll just say, Julia's going to play some nice music. You should be able to, I think, see my screen right now. So yeah, hopefully when we come back from our couple minutes, going to the bathroom and whatever, we'll have some other guests that you've invited in, and we'll be really excited to hear from Laura Height about the biomass campaign. And I think that's it from me. Enjoy your break. All right. Hi, everybody. Fred, this is all you.
Oh, okay. Welcome, everyone. I am the Reverend Fred Small. I am Policy Director of Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light. Some of you know about us. Hopefully, many of you know about us. But if you don't, we are a statewide interfaith organization that puts faith into action for climate justice. We've been talking earlier this evening about a three-legged stool. We have a similar three columns of what we do: pray, act, and mobilize. Prayer is how we draw connections between our faith traditions and spiritual practices and the work of environmental justice making. ACT is the what we sometimes call a ministry of pipes and wires, of bringing our houses of worship into alignment with our values of sustainability and care for creation through environmental stewardship assessments that MassIPL offers, and consulting closely with congregations on how they can save energy and save money. And finally, mobilize. Mobilize is making those systemic changes in the world and in policy that can help begin to move us through this tremendous challenge of climate crisis and environmental injustice, to bring the power we have as individuals and as people of faith to make a difference in the world. I'll put a link to MassIPL in the chat, but that's a brief introduction, and we are so delighted to be partnering with our sibling organization, Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, on this Be the Spark training.
Yeah, and I'll just introduce myself really quickly. My name's Carissa. Some of you I don't know since you just hopped on the call. Nice to meet you. I'm calling in from Minneapolis. And Julia, my colleague, maybe you can wave too. We offer Be the Spark, or leadership and organizing trainings, normally in person, but due to COVID now they have moved onto Zoom to give people of faith and spirituality skills and competencies and tools to affect change in their own communities, and be really effective at tackling the climate crisis and making a livable world for all. So it's been really fun, even though COVID is awful, to use Zoom to connect across the country and bring this training to MassIPL. So this is our fourth and final Be the Spark session that you're joining just for a little bit of. And with that, I think I'm going to pass it back to Fred for our land acknowledgement and grounding. But Julia, do you have anything else to add?
Oh, I'm just super excited to be working in Massachusetts to do something that's really important. So we try to never do something that's just theoretical. We like to talk about organizing in the context of doing organizing. And so that's what we're doing tonight. We're working to try to, really activate a campaign that's important in Massachusetts. All right, Fred.
Thank you. I invite you all now, if you're willing, to close your eyes or lower your gaze in the spirit of contemplation and reverence. We are all on Indigenous land. Here in Massachusetts, we reside on the ancestral and unceded territory of many peoples: Massachusetts, Mohican, Nauset, Nipmuc, Pawtucket, Pocumtuck, Pocasset, Wabanaki Confederacy, and Wampanoag. These peoples, the original stewards of this land, hold to this day inextinguishable rights. We acknowledge that our Commonwealth and our nation were built on the trauma of violent conquest, racism, and oppression, often abetted by religious authority. We vow to oppose these evils and to promote healing love, and justice. Amen.
Amen.
As our subject tonight is biomass, and we'll be talking a lot about it in the coming minutes, I'd like to offer one of my favorite poems by Mary Oliver, When I Am Among Trees. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I am so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me, the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches, and they call again. "It's simple," they say. And you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine.
Thank you, Fred. So I'm gonna share my screen one more time before we have Laura Height hop on to talk about this toxic biomass campaign. Also, Julia, if you could maybe mute yourself if your sound is on. I'm getting a little feedback. We're gonna just do a little brainstorm as a group because maybe some of you are biomass experts and others of you are like, what is that? So if you want to be brave and come off mute, we love to talk here, or just write in the chat, what do you know about biomass? And I will capture whatever I hear. And of course, you could say nothing. That's fine.
That Springfield fought a biomass center and won.
Biomass plant, maybe?
Sure.
Alex said companies supplying the fuel have been doing a lot of clear cutting in the southeastern US. I'll just copy and paste. Oop, I thought I could just copy it in, but I can't. Okay. Jenny says almost nothing. That's awesome. Because you learn, yay. I don't know very much either. Wood is biomass, yep. It's considered renewable energy, but emissions are high. Yep, so Alex says, yep, same thing. So in the EU and in the US. Oh, thank you. Yes, Jean and Barbara. Well, Barbara is kind of the most specific definition. It's burning organic matter to create fuel. And it does create greenhouse gases, even though it can be considered renewable energy. Anything else? This is a lot. Hopefully, hopefully if you didn't really know anything, now you at least know a tiny bit. Oh, causes asthma. Okay, Mark said it's viewed as carbon neutral because the plants captured the carbon when they were alive, and then when they were burned, the carbon goes back into the atmosphere. So considered carbon neutral due to plants taking in CO2. Inefficient. Looks like Burlington. Susan, can you explain that a tiny bit? Burlington, Vermont has a citywide fuel system from biomass, do you mean?
Yes, from biomass. It's a plant that lives on wood chips that are, I don't know where they're transported from, but all over the city. But a few years back, I lived there a while ago now, so I'm the details are fading. But they did find a way to capture the pollution and sequester it and not let it out into the atmosphere, but they are using wood for fuel.
Okay, well, look at that. Now we have all this info. I learned, it's not a fun fact, but speaking of someone saying it causes asthma, what was a thing that maybe you learned last week from our special guest, Jesse, about Springfield, which has, you know, things being burned. Anybody remember?
Well, it's gone from number 1 to number 12.
Number 1 to number 12, what?
In the rate of asthma.
Yeah, in the whole US.
Cities. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot happening here. So thank you everybody for that crowdsourcing. And so with that, I'm going to, in a moment, have Fred introduce our speaker. But just so you all know, for folks who just hopped on a few minutes ago and haven't been in Be the Spark, we're going to get to hear from Laura Height, who is the U.S. Policy Director at Partnership for Policy Integrity. Again, Fred will introduce her in a moment, and we'll get to hear about what's going on in Massachusetts to fight biomass and actually what's happening right now and how we can potentially get involved. And there'll also be time for question and answer with Laura. So we're super excited to have her. So Fred, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, looks like I'm off mute. Good. Yes, I am delighted to introduce to you Laura Height, U.S. Policy Director of PFPI, Partnership for Policy Integrity, which you can find out more about at pfpi.net. I'm not going to bore you or Laura with a recitation of her many credentials and accomplishments, which you can find on that website, pfpi.net/about. What I do want to say is that I've been involved in the movement against biomass incineration in Massachusetts for several years. And whenever I need reliable information about what's going on, Laura is the person I go to. She and PFPI have been champions on this crucial environmental justice issue for a long time. And I'm just thrilled that Laura could join us this evening to share her expertise and her passion with us. Laura.
First off, Fred, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. And that was just a beautiful poem you recited by Mary Oliver. I love that. And I wish I could be attending all of these sessions, because I've already, just in planning for this workshop, learned so much from Carissa and Julie. So Julia, so I just wanted to say that this is not going to be a lecture about what is biomass. There's some things that clearly there's not only a range of knowledge among those of you who are participating today, but some of you I might disagree with just a tiny bit. Accurate in some ways, in that, for instance, biomass energy is treated as carbon neutral in most parts of the world. So legally that is the case, but in reality, scientists have shown demonstrably, starting in Massachusetts, that it's actually not at all carbon neutral. And in fact, it could take decades to over centuries for new tree growth to grow and replace the trees that are burned instantaneously, to grow and absorb that carbon that was released when you burn the trees to produce energy. But I'm not going to bore you with that, because Julia has taught me that you really need to go to your heart when you're talking about these issues. And I want to just talk with you about the number one thing that somebody mentioned on that list, which is, what do you know about biomass? That's the thing that they killed in Springfield. That's the thing that the community organized together to fight and eventually won. And it was my honor to be part of the last few years of that campaign. It's not over yet, and there's more work for us to do, which is why I'm so excited that this team wants to learn more about what we can do in Massachusetts. So just to begin with, I've been working with Partnership for Policy Integrity since 2017. I'm a longtime environmental activist going back to childhood. But this issue is new to me, as it is new to many of you. And in Springfield in particular, it took me a long time to realize the significance of what was going on there. When I started at PFPI, I knew that it was fundamental to our organization's beginning. Back around 2008, there are 3 biomass power plants. These are wood burning power plants proposed in Western Massachusetts, in Russell, Greenfield, and Springfield. And my boss, Mary Booth, who Jesse talked about last week, if you were at that program, was involved early on in grassroots campaign, and maybe some of you as well, fighting these biomass power plants. And at the time, it was being promoted as clean, green energy, wonderful new thing. But people didn't know that much about the actual carbon impacts. So there's a tremendous statewide campaign, which resulted in enough pressure put on Governor DeVal Patrick that he commissioned a scientific study, the MassIPL study, to look at those carbon impacts, and committed to including the results of that study in our state's determination as to whether something should be treated as renewable energy and get subsidies as renewable energy. So Massachusetts really was a leader, and Mary, having worked in these communities, realized that this wasn't just a battle going on in Massachusetts, it was going on across the country. And then there's just been this huge growth of this industry, which is largely driven by subsidies. And I believe it was Alex who mentioned what's going on in the EU. One of the reasons why Mary brought me on staff was she realized the biggest push for biomass energy was in the European Union, where it's treated not only as renewable energy, but as carbon neutral energy. And you had coal plants switching to biomass, woody biomass, and most of those pellets were coming from the US Southeast. Horrible cases of clear cutting and pollution from the wood pellet production, shipped over to the EU, where facilities were getting millions of dollars a day in subsidies because they treated it as renewable and having no emissions. And yet out the stack, it's actually worse emissions than coal. So in terms of meeting our greenhouse gas emissions goals, it's just kind of like waving a magic wand, making them disappear, but they're still there. And in terms of the pollution controls, you can't really control for carbon dioxide, and the other pollutants coming out of the stack are very similar to coal, very, very heavy amounts of particulate matter and other contaminants that affect human health. So bring this back to Springfield. I knew that Springfield was part of our history. I knew that we had won this major victory in Massachusetts in developing this renewable energy portfolio standard that actually counted carbon emissions, making it the only state in the nation that did that, and actually the only place in the world at that time that actually had a scientific approach. And this is why my organization was founded, was to try to advance that type of approach in other countries and across this country. Instead, shortly after I joined the staff, Governor Baker started dismantling our regulatory programs in Massachusetts and actually building more and more subsidies for biomass power. Again, I knew that some of the plants had gone away after we had this major. What happened when we had that rule change, when DeVal Patrick changed the renewable portfolio standard to actually have science interjected, was that all these polluting power plants in Maine and some in New Hampshire and elsewhere were just booted out of the program because they were clearly too polluting to count as renewable energy in Massachusetts. And as a result, they had to go elsewhere for subsidies. And it's really corporate welfare what's going on with these power plants. But I knew that because of that change, without the subsidies, the Greenfield and the Russell plant went away. But there's always some question mark over Springfield. Is Springfield happening? What was going on in Springfield? And it was just always in the back of one's mind. But as the residents who are involved in that campaign will say, it's like a zombie plant, he's never quite dead. So fast forward to 2019, out of the blue, the Department of Energy Resources, the Massachusetts department that manages our renewable energy programs, released revised regulations that actually changed the rules to once again allow these biomass power plants out of state to qualify, as well as biomass power plant like Palmer in Springfield. Now, this plant, for those of you who weren't familiar with it, would be located in an environmental justice community that is identified as the capital of the nation 2 years running. and high poverty levels, and a lot of actually good work had been done to try to improve the air quality over the years, and this would set the whole city back. So we were alarmed, to say the least, and we organized. We worked with the Springfield organizations to push for hearing in Springfield, and hundreds of people attended. This is 2019, a year before COVID and George Floyd, and they were all wearing masks and saying, "I can't breathe," and fighting these regulations. And so that's when I got to meet some of the longtime leaders, specifically Michael Ann Busey, who sadly passed away later that year, but she had been at Arise and spearheading this whole fight against Palmer renewable energy since 2008. And she was really, her spirit is still with us. When we did win, and we did win on this, we think, but it's never sure. Her spirit was very much with us. We carried her with us into that victory. We included her because she was a big part of the final victory. But a lot took place to finally get this to happen. And just speaking personally, even then in 2019, I didn't get significance of Springfield. My organization had, this is our signature policy, this Massachusetts renewable energy policy that actually counted carbon emissions from biomass power plants and therefore excluded almost all of them. The only ones that would qualify would be very, very small, highly efficient combined heat and power plants. And there are only 2 or 3 actually that qualified under the standards after they injected science into it. And I viewed Springfield as kind of the group that could help us defend plans to remove it, to roll it back. But things did change in 2020. And, eventually, it wasn't until really all the pieces came together and I could see how all these pieces fit into a puzzle that led to Palmer being built, that I realized, that I shifted my view, and it stopped being about, holding that. My priority was no longer about, protecting this Massachusetts policy. My priority was about saving lives. And I'm sure those of you who've been engaged in this campaign, Fred and others on this call, felt the same way. You had, 2020, we were raising the same points in fighting this power plant that they'd been raising for the previous 12 years. But 2020 was the year that those points stuck, 2020 and into 2021. We had COVID going on. We had the, air quality issues, understanding that particulates increase the risk of getting COVID and dying, understanding of environmental racism and systemic racism, and how communities like Springfield are disproportionately impacted. And so nothing we said really changed. It's just people were more receptive to what we were saying. And this, what turned it around publicly, I believe, was this article that David Abel published in the Boston Globe in fall of 2020, where I had been working for 2 years to get him to write an article about all these rule changes that the Baker administration was doing. And it would have gone, that article would have read like, blah, 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 blah. David, similar to Julia, recognizes that the way people get these stories is through the people who are impacted. And this article actually reached a whole lot of people who'd never heard of Springfield, who knew nothing about Palmer, who really didn't know about biomass, and suddenly were really, really concerned and upset. And this was a huge, huge lift to our campaign, because at this point, by October 2020, the legislature was now a problem. They had a bill introduced, last minute introduction in a climate bill they had advanced that would have essentially incentivized municipal lighting plants to purchase biomass power. So I think there's a chart, the next slide. When you get by December 2020, this plant was looking very real. The zombie plant that sort of everybody thought had gone away, we discovered that it already had lined up power purchase agreements for 75% of its power from 8 municipal light plants across the state. The Governor Baker's proposed revisions to the renewable portfolio standard came out, And it was like they're written specifically for the Palmer plant. That would have been another $13 million per year in perpetuity, paid for by you guys, paid for by, or us guys. I'm in New York, I'll be full disclosure here, but paid for by Massachusetts ratepayers on their electricity bills as clean energy, as well as Richie Neal advancing federal production tax credits for biomass power plants. So this plant was going to be built, and this was alarming. And by this time, we had formed sort of a committee under the aegis of the Springfield Climate Justice Coalition, and we were doing the best we could. And it was hard because we didn't have Michael Ann Busey, we didn't have our leader. Many of the people involved were new. Arise, which had been central to the organizing campaign all through those years, didn't have capacity to be a leader. And many of us were not from Springfield. And we knew the importance of having Springfield and frontline leaders, front and center. So this is a very hard stretch for us. And we were actually all aligned around a legislative strategy to push the state legislature to take biomass out completely from woody biomass, from the renewable portfolio standard, so that it would just cut the subsidies off completely. And it was around that point in December that these new regulations came down, after our public hearings in June 2019, in mid-December 2020, they tried to sneak through these bad rules. And that's when, I will pat myself on the back a little bit, because I just made my best pitch to this coalition that we needed to change our strategy. We needed to change our course. And there was a lot of pushback because we were pretty disciplined in support of a legislative strategy to change the statewide program. And I was like, we don't have time. We don't know if the legislature is going to pass this bill. We certainly don't know if they're going to pass it bill on time. And these regulations could come down, in January or February, and Palmer could be built before the legislature even does anything. This money was key to Palmer actually being built, Palmer being this biomass power plant. And so eventually we prevailed, and we switched targets over to Governor Baker. And there were naysayers who didn't think that Baker could be moved, that Governor Baker, is sort of the Teflon governor and very popular. But, biomass power, whether or not you agree in theory about biomass energy being renewable or clean or any sort of, what should be part of any sort of energy future, you all have to agree that if you could pick you couldn't pick a worse place than Springfield in terms of harming human health for putting a biomass power plant. And so we just shamed Governor Baker. And this next slide, was the launch of our campaign. We focused targeting action alerts on him. And the next slide, we had a press conference in February in 2021. Activists in Springfield released a letter to Governor Baker calling him to come to Springfield and talk to the citizens directly about this proposal. And guess what? Within 2 months, we had won, or we think we'd won. Within 2 months, in April came the big announcements. First, that the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection revoked the permit for this power plant, which is actually incredible. And they cited all of our arguments, the health arguments, COVID, environmental justice, particulate matter. They cited our arguments for revoking the permit. And then 2 weeks later, the Department of Energy Resources revised their proposed RPS rule changes, and added some pretty good stuff in there. One that would prohibit biomass facilities from even qualifying for the incentives if they're located within 5 miles of an environmental justice community. And the other one don't count because it just keeps some of the old standards that they tried to get rid of. So that was a huge victory. We hope that stands firm for Springfield. The Palmer people haven't quit yet, but I would say that the Springfield Climate Justice Coalition was very strong in our statement, as we celebrated this victory. I'll just read it. As we celebrate a major step forward for the people of Springfield who have been fighting this plant for more than 12 years and for environmental justice communities across the state, we want to be clear that biomass does not belong anywhere in the Commonwealth's clean energy future. We're concerned that DOER's proposal includes loopholes, right, this is what I was going to mention, that would allow existing polluting biomass power plants throughout the Northeast to qualify for ratepayer-funded renewable energy credits in Massachusetts. The Springfield Climate Justice Coalition is committed to continuing to work towards eliminating dirty biomass altogether as a source of energy. No matter where they are sited, biomass power plants pump out health-harming air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change. So that was our springboard to go back to the statewide campaign that we're working on now, that we certainly would welcome your help on. You know, we've handled the emergency, we've saved the lives. We think there's still work to do in Springfield, but it's looking like they can't possibly. The zombie might actually be dead, and if it's not dead, we're going to keep on killing it. But we were very, very close to having a plant in Springfield, and if we hadn't all switched gears to kill that plant, people would be dying from the emissions. So that was my personal story, that I don't regret a minute of that detour. And I'm also incredibly grateful that all the people who went on that detour with me are staying on. Obviously, there's new battles to fight in Springfield, and not everybody can put the same amount of time and effort into it, but there's a solidarity moving forward that we want to continue to fight these rules, which go into effect in next week. We've pushed the legislature on legislation that would take woody biomass out of not only the renewable portfolio standard, but also another thing, the alternative portfolio standard, which funds heating, renewable heating projects. And they held a hearing. The committee that's overseeing this held a hearing in September on the bill that we're promoting, and dozens of people testified and even more wrote letters. And we're continuing to push for them to pass that bill. And the reason why is, even though these regulations do have protections that will ensure that Palmer would never get funded. In fact, if you look at the next slide of Massachusetts, if you the committee, it's called the TUE committee that has this bill. It's the Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy Committee, asked DOER to put together their map of like, well, just exactly what areas would be excluded from qualifying, you know, for these funds. And as you can see, most of Massachusetts is within 5 miles of an environmental justice community. So why is DOER and Governor Baker pushing so hard on these rule changes that are going to be going into effect next week? Well, it was never, as much as some of it might have been about Palmer, mostly they just want to cheat on the renewable energy goals and be able to backfill some of our energy from these same dirty biomass power plants in Maine and New Hampshire and elsewhere that previously were in our program. We got booted out when we, you know, added the inconvenience of scientific emissions calculations. So the campaign is switched, and from a moral standpoint, the argument is no community should have to go through what Springfield had to go through. No community should ever have to. And then from a larger standpoint, it's a little bit harder to grasp, but in that same emotional way, because it's easy to grasp the emotional impacts of, you know, a community that's dealt with so much air pollution and been the brunt of so many bad things, getting yet another bad thing dumped on it. But this is about how we address our clean energy future. It is about climate change. I mean, even if these new rules don't result in new biomass power plants being built, they're still propping up these dirty plants in Maine and New Hampshire that are, cutting down trees that we actually need to actually absorb our carbon and spewing out emissions that aren't even counted as carbon. So we need, our campaign is these plants might be out of sight, but they're not out of our climate, and we should not be dirtying our renewable energy incentives by bringing them back in. So this is, I think you get the point. What we're trying to do here, we're trying to keep the momentum going. Is certainly compelling right now because the new rules are going to affect shortly, that we really need to push the legislature to take action on these bills. And thanks to the fact that so many people have really cared about this around the state, people took this personally. It wasn't just me here in New York. All across the state, people really engaged in this campaign. And that's why we're so far ahead as we are, because legislators heard from people everywhere. So we need to keep on bringing that message to legislators. Some of them think that the problem's solved because Palmer has been blocked, or they don't know how this program is structured and they just think Massachusetts saved. But we know better. We know that these changes that Governor Baker is doing will prop up, continued biomass power, and that's money that should be spent on solar and wind and energy efficiency and all these clean things that we can do for our future. So I'm going to stop there. Other than, I guess, the next slide is, this is the bill that we're pushing, and we have a website, campaign website that the Springfield Climate Justice Coalition started called notoxicbiomass.org. And I'll put that link in the chat, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I wonder if this is a good time to show the action page that Massachusetts or IPL has got ready to go.
Sure, Laura and I went back and forth on that as to whether we should have questions first or go to the ask. But as I say, we went back and forth, so
no, we don't need to do it. All you need to know is that we are about to, in a few minutes after these questions, tell you how you can get involved. So yes, so we should answer questions, but don't think this is the end. I have a question for you, Laura. I'll just start us out. This actually comes right from one of the Be the Spark participants, Matthew, who wanted to know, how does a group of people get together to figure out what strategy to use? And how were you able to tell us a little bit of the story of how you shifted from focusing on sort of a statewide campaign to really getting people to focus statewide on Palmer?
This was very hard. This was, a leader like Michael Ann Busey, you don't just replace somebody. You have to sort of recognize in a situation like that you can't replace somebody, but that all you can do is the best you can. And in this particular case, we were very fortunate. Now, there are three organizations. PFPI is one of them, Conservation Law Foundation is another, and Community Action Works, which used to be Toxics Action Coalition, that had been helping the Springfield groups since the very beginning. And when I say Springfield groups, really helping Michael Ann, Jesse, the Arise. And since very beginning, being since 2008. But we'd all been primarily dealing directly with Michael Ann, not working together, because we had different roles that we played. PFPI is really much more of a policy, wonky, science-y type of group. We're not organizers. CLF, of course, legal, also policy wonky, and Toxics Action Coalition was doing the, neighborhood organizing. Springfield Climate Justice Coalition really tried to step into the breach in this absence of Arise having the resources and capacity to lead like they had in the past. And Community Action Works hired this young organizer, Marae Bajani, who, sort of joined them, and she set up a structure. I was just thanking her today. I told her she played midwife to this victory. She set up a structure which ended up working as the leadership structure. And into that, all of us participated. These three statewide groups, PFPI, CLF, and Community Action Works, as well as members of the Springfield Climate Justice Coalition and other people. Now, we also have many structures, communications networks and advocacy networks within Massachusetts. And so listservs, everybody was notified, but we worked as a team within that is called the No Toxic Biomass Working Group or campaign in developing our messaging. And it was hard, but in the end, it was really very legit, because we really made sure that community voices that was centered around the community, and that there was agreement and alignment on strategies.
I want to just bring one phrase up that I say again and again. You all have heard it before, I bet. But nothing about us without us is something that we say a lot in Minnesota. And sometimes you'll have a really sort of power coalition of folks, and then they'll be together also with a group of frontline activists trying to do something. And it would be a lot easier to not have to bring all those multiple voices in, less meetings, less Zoom calls, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, creating a process to, not only be nimble, but be inclusive is essential. And I will just say one thing, which is that if there's one way to move fast, it's to build relationships. So I think there's an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. No, I think I just got that wrong. Anyway, let me come back to that. But point being that if you have formed good relationships, then it's easy to make a phone call and say, I think we should switch strategies. And if they know and trust you, the answer could be yes in an instant. And if they don't know you and they don't trust you, it could take months to figure out how to get together and figure out a new strategy. So even though relationship building may take time, that's the thing that makes it possible to go fast.
Yeah, and if I could add on that, I believe that's on Arise's website, the Nothing About Us Without Us. And this was very challenging because, again, we wanted to make, it was challenging. I think we all did our best. I didn't hear any complaints. So I guess we all did our best, recognizing with a lot of respect that not all the groups we would have liked to have had at every single call and every single meeting could be there. But, they did, play their role. When we had press conferences, we made sure as frontline speakers, being reporters, we tried to make sure that they spoke to and interviewed those leaders and not like me from New York, the wonky person. So, and then there was, some volunteers who were not necessarily involved in their group capacity, but as individuals recognized. I'm thinking of Jackie Velas from Jobs Without Justice, who was lived in Springfield, and she recognized the need for her voice to be leading, and she did have the time to engage quite a bit, even though she wasn't with Arise or one of the established organizations. Anyway, it was a process. It was worth it. It was totally worth it. But that's why it was so hard, because we were under a lot of pressure. We didn't have all those relationships developed. We were just working it through as it went along, and we won, by the way. So it worked.
All right, other questions? I know you guys have questions. I have so much to say. I'm going to try to hold back.
I'm happy to move to the ask.
No, I'm going to actually say one more thing.
Okay.
One section that we oftentimes, if we have a 16-hour Be the Spark, which this was not, it was just an 8-hour, we do a large section on team building. Like, how do you actually create a space where you can bring wonky people from New York and, frontline people who maybe don't have a college education or even a high school education, people with different schedules, people with different access, how do you do that well? And I don't have a answer. One answer is just trust building. If you like somebody, you can actually ask them what they need, right? If you already know somebody and there's a sense of trust built, you can identify what particular people's needs are. But it is really difficult. And one of the things you have to think about is language barriers, location of meetings. How do you use acronyms? For example, there's lots of joking in our sort of environmental justice networks in Minnesota about if anybody says an acronym, then we just kind of like go like this, because there's some people who are not understanding what that is. These are things that I as a sort of recovering PhD, had to do a lot of work to sort of deprogram myself. And acronyms are useful because it gets to you to where you need to go quickly. So anyway, it is a labor of love figuring out how to build good teams. And it is sort of the middle of the sandwich, right, of the different steps that you need to take to do good organizing, and not to be forgotten.
I see Alex asked in the chat, who are the corporate sponsors that will profit from keeping biomass in the RPS? And are they spending a lot of money to keep it going?
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, there's a couple issues here. There's sort of a cultural thing at Department of Energy Resources. There's a revolving door with them and the logging industry, it appears. So some of it is ideological. Some of it is, as I said, Baker, I mean, we got the commissioner to finally acknowledge at a hearing that the TUE held that, and part of this is he knows that they can't get the renewable energy in place overnight, but with the stroke of a pen, you can say, look, we got all this renewable energy by purchasing this biomass power from Maine. And I think there's a handshake deal. I mean, there's certainly some quid pro quo between the governor of Maine and the governor of Massachusetts on this issue. Don't forget, Maine is now really subsidizing heavily these biomass power plants and would love it if Massachusetts ratepayers return to our old, game of giving them, getting like $10 or $15 million a year each, maybe more depending on their size. So we haven't really found a big corporate bad guy here yet, but there's a lot to fight.
Great. All right, Fred, what is it that you are hoping folks in Massachusetts IPL will do to get involved in this fantastic campaign to protect people and also decarbonize our quickly warming world?
Thank you. So Laura has explained why this is so important to keep biomass out of Massachusetts and New England. And we have a chance right now to actually do something about it. We have prepared a form with a message to your legislators urging them to pass the legislation Laura mentioned that would disqualify biomass energy from government subsidies. And once you fill out the form, we will forward your message to your own state senator and representative. I'm going to put the link to the form in the chat. Here it goes. And please read it right now. Open the link, take a look at it, fill out the form and submit it. If you really want to compose your own letter, there is a space where you can do that, in which case you can copy the URL and fill out the form later, because we won't have time for you to draft your letter tonight. But we're hoping most of you will be happy enough with the prepared message that you can submit the form right away, and then it's done. And we will get those to your legislators. Any questions about that? Great. Now, once you've done that, we're also going to invite you to network, to talk to your friends, to have one-on-ones, as we've learned to do, and to bring that form to them as well. But the first step is to fill it out yourself. So we'll take a couple of minutes to do that.
Julia, do you want to play like a minute of Scottish music for in honor of Glasgow?
By yon bonny banks and by yon bonny braes, where the sun shines bright on Loch Lomond, where me and my true love On the bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. 'Twas there that we parted in yon shady glen, on the steep, steep sides of Lomond, where in the purple hue the Highland hills we view, and the moon coming out in the gloaming. Oh, you'll take the high road and
Awesome. Well, Fred, I'm just going to share my screen really fast. Hopefully all of you actually, before I share my screen, thumbs up if you filled out the letter. Look at all that. I was just speaking really quickly from myself. I was just amazed at Laura's story of how the governor was so responsive to people pressure from around the state, because, you know, here in Minnesota, we have a governor who we've been trying to pressure on the Line 3 pipeline, who's just been totally impervious to any public pressure. And so getting to hear, you know, a different situation is really inspiring. So I hope that you feel extra empowered that your voices matter. Laura.
I might have skipped over that part. I mean, we accused Governor Baker of environmental racism and hypocrisy, and threw in some nasties about sneaking in these regulations over the Christmas holidays. So it was pretty egregious, and also accused him of writing these regulations specifically to benefit Palmer, which in a way is true. I mean, the regulations would have benefited Palmer first, but of course benefit others as well. So I would say that any governor should be at least, and this was during COVID. I think any governor should be at least sensitive to these issues, don't you? Even yours?
We could tell a story about Line 3 for many hours, but the answer is our governor apparently is in fact impervious to all of the above. But
okay.
What I will say is this, right? Which is, and I'm so glad you brought this up. One of the things about campaigns, right, is that you sometimes have to push people beyond where they're comfortable in order to move from people power to a result that you're looking for. And part of doing that was making sure that he felt the heat. And
can I just say that the people in Weymouth who tried to do the same thing did not succeed. So before everybody starts saying that, Charlie Baker can in fact be moved by this strategy, this is at this point a one-off. So don't everybody move to Massachusetts thinking it's ideal here, because it's not perfect.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah,
well, no one on this call from Massachusetts, or I think anyone else on the call, imagines that Massachusetts is perfect. For me, the lesson also is that you never know what is going to work and what isn't going to work. You can have the most sophisticated strategy. You can bring in as many allies as you can, and sometimes you just thread the needle, and the magic works. So the lesson really is, you got to keep trying, because you never know when you're going to reach a tipping point. You never know when just the right person is going to bring just the right pressure to bear at just the right moment. And Carol, I'm with you. We've been fighting that Weymouth struggle for many, many years, and long since, long before I became involved. And we're still fighting. And we never know when, a federal body, a congressional act, a state regulation, just the stars will be aligned. And if we keep pushing, sometimes we'll win and sometimes we'll lose, but we'll never know until it happens.
Amen. Amen. And those of you who are on, this call last week, there's Jesse. While we were doing our grassroots thing, Jesse Letterman was lining up state legislators to introduce the legislation. He was reaching out to Senators Markey and Warren, who wrote a key letter. So it's an all of the above strategy. And you're right, Fred. It sometimes it all lines up, and you got to wonder if there's a little bit of luck or going on there as well. You never know when it's going to happen.
And you know what? If you all are tempted to take shortcuts again on relationships, and I'm hammering this home, I hope, many different ways. At the end of a campaign, like the campaign against Line 3, which in many people's eyes is over, because oil is running from the Canadian border all the way to the Wisconsin border, and we have lost, which I can't even hardly say without having emotion. At the end of the day, every one of the relationships that I made along the way is a trusted ally right now. And so if you're tempted to do things fast and alone because you think it will, work, you just always have to remember that we have built so much power in Minnesota. And I have no idea what is going to happen to that power. And Fred is part of it. And there's people from across the world who have visited us here. I mean, like, we have no idea where we're going. But if we hadn't seen each other along the way, we'd just be mad and spinning off on our own circles. And so anyway, there's a little bit of that happening here too. I won't lie.
Well, I know we're a little over, and I know Sue's had her virtual hand up for a long time. So Sue, let's hear you, and then we'll let Laura and our guests leave.
Two things. One is that I noticed that this bill has had its committee hearing in the TUE. So it's theoretically possible that it could be voted out anytime. Not entirely likely, but definitely possible. So if we want to take action, we need to do that in the short term rather than the long term. And there was something else, but now I've forgotten it. So sorry.
Thank you for bringing back to the legislation. Yeah, absolutely. We've made a difference. I think the legislators really now have their eyes open in a way that 2 years ago, they absolutely did not. And I think they're sick of hearing about it, which is great because we're sick of talking about it. So it could be a win-win situation. They pass this legislation and the conversation once and for all, so we all can focus on clean energy for a change.
That's fantastic. Well, before we say goodbye, thanks so much for staying a few minutes over. Just wanted to show you some of these next steps on the slideshow, and everybody who's on this call will get these slides tomorrow. But yeah, please share this petition, as Sue said, quickly and widely. It's really quick to do, but every voice and message to our legislators right now matters. And I also just threw in the notoxicbiomass.org campaign site, which I assume you can follow for updates, but you can also get updates from MassIPL if something happens. So that was just something I just wanted to show quickly, but thanks so much, Laura. That was really incredible. And Fred, you can say any other thanks and goodbye.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll be in touch with Fred on a daily basis after this. So not goodbye. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Pleasure.
All right. Take care.
Thank you, Laura.
Laura. Amazing. Well, we have earned a 5-minute break. So if you were a guest, thank you so much for coming. It was really wonderful to have you on. I hope you feel inspired, excited about next steps, which again, you'll get concrete tomorrow. And if you are part of Be the Spark, please take a little break. We'll play some more music for about 5 minutes, go to the bathroom, get more food, and we'll see you back here at 7:38. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Except not Be the Spark people.
Once there was a shepherd lad kept sheep upon the hill, and he's laid his pipe in his crook aside, and there he slept his fill. He woke up on a river bank on a fine approach the maid. Put on your clothes, my dear, he says, and do not be afraid. It's fitter for a lady fair to sew silken seam than to rise on a fine May morning and swim against the stream. Well, if you'll not touch my mantle and you'll leave my clothes alone, and I'll give you all the money, sir, that you can carry home. I'll not touch your mantle and I'll leave your clothes alone, but I'll tack you out of the clear water, my dear, to be my aim. And he's ta'en her out of the clear water and he's round her in his arms. Put on your clothes, my dear, he says, and hide your bounteous charms. He's put her on a milk-white steed, himself upon another, and it's all along the way they rode, like sister and like brother. She rode into her father's gate and she straddled at the pen, and ready stood a porter there to let the fair maid in. Well, the gates were opened, it so nimbly she stepped in. She said, "King sir, you are a fool without, and I'm a maid within. So fare ye weel, my modest boy, I thank you for your care. But had you done as you desired, I'd never have left you there. I will sew no silken seam on a fine May morning. You can bide your time till your time runs out, so take this as fair warning. I will sew no silken seam on a fine May morning. You can bide your time till your time runs out, so take this as fair warning."
I didn't try hard enough. I didn't try hard enough. The gold I saved and the good times turned to lead when it was rough. I must admit the rough was pretty tough. I didn't try hard enough.
Okay, perfect. Well, that was super fun and so inspiring. So what we're gonna do for our final, just about 20 minutes together, you all are champions and amazing. Fred is going to share more about the Faith in Action campaign, talk more about kind of those next steps and just some exciting stuff there. And then we'll close with an evaluation, again, not just an evaluation of the program, and you know, if you want time to actually fill out kind of a debrief evaluation Google form, we will be sending that out tomorrow as well. But this is just kind of space to reflect a little bit, not only on, you know, our 4 weeks together, but also what you've learned and what you are excited to do as a next step after this. And then we'll close. So Fred, I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Carissa. So, just bringing up my notes here. There we go. So, as many of you know, Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light was founded about 2 decades ago. And one of our main efforts has been to provide conservation expertise and renewable energy services to houses of worship. We're good at it. And if your congregation hasn't had an environmental stewardship assessment from MassIPL, just let me know and we'll get you set up with one. But we know, as Carissa and Julia have acknowledged, we know that greening our congregations is not enough. Greening our congregations, however important, does not adequately confront the climate crisis we're facing, nor does it address the systemic injustice that undergirds it. People of faith who care about creation and environmental justice have to move beyond the 4 walls of our houses of worship into the public square and into the corridors of power. Only then can we have a meaningful impact on the laws, policies, and regulations that can actually stop climate change and protect our most vulnerable neighbors. Only then, together, can we bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice. That's why, in cooperation with religious and secular environmental groups across the Commonwealth, MassIPL is launching the Faith in Action campaign to mobilize faith-based activists to hold our legislators and other decision makers accountable on climate and environmental justice. Grounded in their home congregations, Faith in Action teams will reach across boundaries of faith tradition and denomination in unified strategic campaigns for key policy goals. MassIPL will offer training, guidance, and support to these Faith in Action teams, giving priority to those in legislative districts where religious environmental activism is likely to have the greatest impact. And we'll use the organizing techniques we've been learning in Be the Spark to build these teams and build power to make the changes we so urgently need. Our North Star goal is to convene more and more Faith in Action teams until we include all of the 160 legislative districts in the Commonwealth, to bring our diverse religious voices strategic unity and moral authority to the climate and environmental justice struggle. That's an ambitious goal, but as the Tao Te Ching reminds us, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Tonight, I'm asking each of you to take that step by signing up for the Faith in Action campaign. I'm not asking you for a commitment, but only a willingness to stay in conversation and discern in time if you'd like to play a role in the campaign. I'm going to put the URL for the sign up form in the chat. Navigating there right now. There it goes. Please open the form, take a look at it, and let us know of your interest. Almost at the very end of the form, you'll find a question, are you interested in actually taking some kind of leadership role? And that'd be great if you're ready to do that. If you're not, that's fine. Just, as I say, stay in the conversation. Some of the things you can do in the meantime, as we're building capacity for the Faith in Action campaign, you can begin to practice these one-on-ones that we've been learning about, not only on the biomass message that we shared in the previous hour, but also you can invite people with whom you are in deepening conversation to the Advocacy Day sponsored by Mass Power Forward. Mass Power Forward, as many of you know, is a statewide, progressive, very broad coalition for renewable energy and climate justice. Their advocacy day is going to be January 27 of the new year, 2022. That's a Thursday. I don't think they have a link for it yet. I looked for it, but you can save the date. It's virtual, so we won't actually be trying to get to the State House as we have sometimes in years past. But you can certainly the Faith in Action campaign will be cooperating and collaborating with that advocacy day. So you have the link. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, by all means, be in touch with me. And if there are any questions right now, I'm happy to briefly respond. Sue has her hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering when you will start working on developing these chapters or groups.
Well, the short answer is immediately. So Miriam Cohen, who is on the Zoom tonight and has been with us throughout Be the Spark, is our newly hired organizer to help bring the campaign to fruition. She is a fellow from Join for Justice, which is an absolutely crackerjack trainer of Jewish organizers, and we are very lucky to have her. Some of our next steps will be, first we are convening a planning team for the campaign with representation from the major denominational and faith-based Massachusetts environmental and climate advocacy groups. And we are also going to be putting together a toolkit to help people begin to build these teams in their communities. But anybody who wants to start, we're ready to rock and roll. I think in terms of a formal launch, it may be January 1 of 2022, but anybody who wants to get started before then, we're ready.
Start having one-to-ones.
Exactly.
Yep.
Hey, Miriam and Fred and all of you, one of my sort of coaching questions at this sort of juncture, it's the perfect question. What do we do? How do we get ready, right? If any of you guys are organizing in a congregation, you're going to hear that question all the time. Oftentimes it's really good to have something, right? I love the fact that Fred was like January 27th, 2020, right? That gives you something it's like a handhold, so that when you go to one-to-one with somebody, you can learn what they're about. You can invite them into the structure of the team that's been described to you. You might invite them to a, little, table at your congregation in order to sign the petition on biomass, for example. But ultimately you tell them, come out, and on January 27th, you're going to be a group of people who's going to tell your story about why you care about climate justice. And it's enough. You don't have to have all the answers about every single platform that, the Mass Power Forward campaign is going to be supporting in order to get started telling your story, doing maybe a bit of a climate conversation like we had the first night, have a one-to-one with people and get them to commit to join you on the 27th. So I hope maybe in the next week, Fred and Miriam, you guys can have some somewhat structured way of people signing up for that day, even if it's not with the big campaign, it's with you, so that you can sort of be in contact with people as they start to form their teams. I think it may be time to hand it over for the very last bit. Fred, do you feel like you have done what you were hoping to say about the campaign?
Absolutely. all I have is the closing words for the very end. We're good.
Perfect. All right. Carissa.
Look at that. I'm seeing in the chat. Local connecting already. Amazing. Maybe a team. Perfect. Okay. Well, I'm gonna share my screen one more time. And like I said, we're gonna do just a little time to pause, have an evaluation. This is not a complete evaluation because again, you will get a Google form tomorrow where you can do stuff at your own pace, but just as kind of a wrap up, as this group, as this amazing consortium of people who've taken time out of your busy lives to gather together and talk about how we can effectively use our time to build an interfaith climate movement. It's pretty amazing. So I just wanted to maybe make this slide a little bigger because I know there's small words on it, but we're gonna just take, maybe 5-ish minutes to really think through your next step. You've heard a lot of things about biomass, you've heard things about faith in action, you've heard stories, you've gotten pictures and concepts and all these things. And so now it's just time to kind of turn inward and think about what is your next step? Like, what do you want to do next? And it doesn't have to be an overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, I need to stop all biomass in the whole country or something like that. That would be too overwhelming. It's like, what is my clear next step that can get me toward where I want to be, where I'm excited. So again, just take a look at some of these things. I'm going to use my cursor and kind of show you. Maybe it's having a one-to-one with someone about the toxic biomass campaign to get them to share their petition with their faith community and get 50 more, messages out to their legislator. Maybe it is really thinking about your story of Self Us Now so that when you do have a one-to-one with someone, you feel really proud and secure in your own story of why you care and you're ready to, ask people what they care about and what's motivating them. Maybe I'm highlighting this, maybe you're already part of a green team in your community and you guys don't really know what you're doing next. And so you're gonna take this concept back to them and say, hey, let's really sit down and think for the next year, what do we want our SMART goal to be? And maybe you can introduce the three-legged stool, and help them think, well, we've done a lot of, energy efficiency, which is really important, but what if we tried to do some more systemic action? And what do you all think? And, start kind of goal setting together. Or maybe it's something totally different. These are just some ideas to get you started. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to leave this up for a little bit and just give like 2 minutes really just to kind of sit with these things. If you want to turn off your camera, you can. Maybe do some journaling and just kind of think like what really resonates with you. Maybe it's thinking about people in your area that you might want to start a faith in action group with, and you just write down those names or something like that. So I'm just going to put on my phone 2 minutes. Please stay with me for it. I promise it's helpful just to pause. So here we go. I'm going to mute myself. And of course, if you have questions, feel free to come off mute or you want to talk through something. Or as people are writing things down, because you still have 2 minutes, I guess 1 and 45 seconds. If you already know what you want to do and you're like pumped about it, feel free to come off mute and share. Could maybe give someone else an idea. 1 minute left to keep reflecting. Again, feel free to come off mute if you want to share, but no pressure. One thing I'll just share, a next step for me, I was really challenged and inspired by what I heard about relationships and how critical they are to maintain, because they are how you can move fast. And so just being really thoughtful in the relationships that I've been developing, and if there are any that maybe they need a phone call, or they need me to reach out for, I guess coffee is hard now because it's cold, but it can be hard when maybe a campaign is over or a big event is over. I find that sometimes I lose touch with people. Okay, that was our timer. We're at 7:55. So if anyone wants to come off mute or write in the chat, feel free, but no worries.
I just want to say I'm actually very full of feeling right now. It's been a dream of Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light to bring Be the Spark to Massachusetts for years. I mean, well before I became active in the organization. And I can see why that we've been so determined to do it. And I know there were some bumps along the way some years back, but here y'all are. And Carissa and Julia, you've done a fabulous job, and I'm just so grateful.
Thank you.
I might come off mute as well, and thank you for a really hands-on series. I unfortunately missed 2 of them because I went back to my home country, Sweden, for 10 days, but I will look at the slides properly. And for me, this exercise that you just gave us to reflect on it, where I am, as I've been asked and I'm willing to take on in my congregation to be doing more of climate work in general. This really, the 3 legal stool and everything I've learned here has really encouraged me to, on the practical level, ask for the energy assessment and other things such as better recycling or stopping using single use and things like that. Is that practical bit that I feel that we need to have, that we need to practice what we preach type of thing, but then to and spiritually is going to be very useful, of course. But then what I really felt was given today was the way to act on a systemic level, and how to encourage people in my church to be doing that, and have the tools such as the campaign, the petition, and so on. So thank you so much. I feel I got hands-on advice. Thanks.
Thank you. And I hope you all are checking the chat for some amazing next steps, and just wonderful stuff there. Well, I'm aware we're already at 7:58, and I have not checked my election results. No one say anything. I'm very nervous, but I've held it together. But I'm just going to share my screen for one moment before Fred closes us. We didn't have time as a group to share out loud some of these evaluations. We always go right up to the end. So sorry about that, but you will again be getting a evaluation and kind of debrief form. And it would be wonderful to hear in that, one thing that you really liked or appreciated, something you'd change, because we're always trying to make this better. And one idea you'll take with you. So there won't be, we won't be able to come off mute and share all those things, but just be aware we'd love to hear your thoughts in the Google form later. And I see Jennifer has a really long, it sounds like it's awesome, next step. But I'm going to turn it over to Fred for our closing. But before, I just wanted to say thank you so much for this time together. You all are wonderful, and you'll have my email, so feel free to email me with any other things or questions or anything else. So Fred.
I'd like to close with the words of Dina Metzger. there are those who are trying to set fire to the world. We are in danger. There is time only to work slowly. There is no time not to love. Amen.
I just want to say thank you to all of you. I feel more energized after being together with you from Massachusetts than I did before. And that is a tremendous gift that we give each other.
Well, you are energizing us, Julia. Your work in line 3 has been absolutely amazing. And the way you've broadened it to be so diverse and inclusive and bringing in the voices of Indigenous communities, I am blown away. I just greatly, greatly appreciate it. Proud to be a former Minnesotan.
Woohoo!
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Fred. Thank you, Fred.